Srila Prabhupada, when he talked about these three Grihastha families, he said these three families are as good or better than sannyasis as far as their fearless, empowered capacity to spread Krishna consciousness. Because no one had ever done it in a substantial way in London. And Shamsundar wrote a letter to Prabhupada. Or he talked to him, something, because there's a letter from Srila Prabhupada to Mukunda Maharaj, where Prabhupada said, Shamsundar wants to give Krishna consciousness to the Beatles. I think it's a good idea. What do you think? The most famous people in the planet. They had so many people screaming during their concerts in some sort of ecstasy of whatever, that they couldn't even hear themselves play. Nobody in the history of the world ever affected people like the Beatles. So they didn't even go public. They just sat in their studios and made records, and everything that they made was go right to become number one. So very hard to meet them. So Yamuna Devi, Malati Devi, and Janaki Devi, they had this strategy, because the Beatles owned a record company called Apple Records. So they started sending different preparations made out of apples. I don't remember what they all, apple cookies, apple pies, apple crisps, apple crunch, apple pudding. They just kept making different apple things. And, at the beginning, the workers were eating, but then everything was so ecstatically nice because it was all offered to Krishna with love and devotion. And it was empowered by Srila Prabhupada, and Yamuna Devi and Malati Devi and Janaki. They were excellent cooks because they so wanted to please Prabhupada so deeply that eventually the Beatles were eating it every day. And we know the story how Shamsundar Prabhu got in to meet Gorge Harrison and became his very best friend, practically. Well, Yamuna Devi explains they made for weeks all these prasad apple preparations. And then very strategically, they stopped making. And the Beatles, where is our apple preparation? So then they got notice, and their relationship became very nice. And soon they were living in the house of John Lennon, who was the leader of the Beatles. When they were living with John Lennon and Gorge Harrison was becoming so serious about Krishna consciousness, George heard them chanting. And he was so enchanted by the chanting that he said, you should make a record. So they made a single 45 RPM record of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. And that went into the public. It was a sensational hit. It was the #1 record of all records. And this was in the 1960s when the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and all these different groups, the Hare Krishna Mahamantra by the devotees was #1. And it was in the top 10 for the whole of Europe. Incredible. So George was so inspired by this that he asked them to come to Apple Records to make a record album. And on that album, the lead song was Yamuna Devi singing Govindam ädi-puruñaà tamaham bhajämy. Of course, Yamuna Devi was the lead singer for the Hare Krishna Mahamantra also. And interestingly, when Gorge Harrison, who was a topmost connoisseur of musical art for that music. He was so deeply moved and impressed by Yamuna Devi's incredible voice, her stature, her charisma, her devotion, that he said, without any problem, we could make her one of the most famous singers in the entire world. And she could sing for Krishna. But Yamuna Devi, she didn't want to do that. She just wanted to serve her Gurudev and go wherever her Gurudev wanted her to go. She never wanted fame, she never wanted prestige, she just wanted to serve.
You were listening to Radhanath Swami on devotionalnectar.com.